Hi folks, it's Maserati here again. Today we're going to be putting rotors on a 2009 Maserati Gran Turismo. So the first thing we're going to do is get the car jacked up and get the tire removed. One thing to be mindful of is the correct jacking point on this car. So if I show underneath of it, use the fingers, you see that there's a hole here and it's solid metal right here actually. That's where you want to put your jack, and I have a jack with a piece of rubber, hard piece of rubber, to give me space so I'm not hitting and damaging my lower ground effect. So we'll get this thing jacked up and we'll get the tire off and we'll continue on. Okay, tools you're going to need: a couple of screwdrivers to push the brake pads and the pistons back into the caliper, a hammer, a very small punch, which is be going into these two little holes here on the caliper to knock two pins out. One here and one here. And in that way the spring will be able to get removed off and then you'll be able to pull these pads right out. Very simple. You're also going to need a 13 millimeter to take off the two retaining bolts for the rotors on here. And then also, very important, you're going to need a 12 millimeter hexagon for the two caliper mounting bolts that are in the back to remove it. Stand by. Okay, with the pins popped out, I showed here, they hammer out this way. Got the spring removed, and then basically the pads, they just simply retract them and then they just slide, a little wiggle, and they should just come right out like that. The other side, be careful because you may or may not have a sensor for the brake, so that right there just simply pops out and we put new ones and pop it back in. Okay, now that we got the brake pads that are out of the way, we're going to remove the caliper. There's two caliper mounting bolts. It is a 12 millimeter hex, and hopefully you can see good. There's one where I have the socket in right now, and there's also one right up here, if you can see where my glove's at. So we'll remove those and the caliper should come right off. Okay, now we got the caliper off. We just put the caliper up on the side on the upper control arm, and then we're jamming to the Bee Gees here. Yes, gotta have some fun while you're doing this work. So then we got our 13 millimeter, and we're going to take off these two retaining bolts that hold the rotor onto the front hub, and then we're going to get a piece of wood and a hammer and just knock on the backside here, and this thing should just pop right off after a few hits. It might be a little tight because it's been rusted on there, but yes, it will come off. Okay, so now we're going to get start ready to remove the rotor. Excuse me for stuttering. But anyhow, we're going to leave a piece of wood and we'll put it on the back side of the rotor where the caliper was, and with our hammer we're going to hit on the back side of it and work our way around, spin the rotor around, and then eventually the rotor will pop off. Okay, so after a few times hitting around with the hammer, rotating it, now the rotor can now pop right off. And then we'll get the new rotor, and then the reverse process to put everything back on. Okay, one thing I'm going to say here, these new rotors, I got them from Formula Dynamics. About 250 bucks a piece, trust me. Go to these people, Formula Dynamics, they're in Nevada. They got great parts, Maserati and Ferrari parts, at a fraction of the cost, because this one rotor from the dealer would be close to $600. So quite a savings. So let's get this thing on, and we'll see how she works. And one thing I do want to note with the hub, when we start putting the reassembly and everything together, you want to get a nice high temperature never cease compound to put on the hub and on the bolts and on the pins, on everything else, so everything comes out. If you ever have to do this again, everything will come apart good. And when you put the caliper mounting bolts back on here, use some blue thread sealant, thread locker, Permatex, to prevent that. That's a requirement, and these things get torqued to about 45 Nm, Newton meters.